I had spent months planning the perfect trip for Mom and Dad, a week-long getaway to the coastal city they'd always dreamed of visiting but never had the chance to see. I'd booked the flights, reserved the charming seaside inn, even compiled a list of local spots they'd love. It was my way of saying thank you for everything they'd done for me growing up, for being my family. The tickets sat on the kitchen counter in a neat envelope, the itinerary pinned to the fridge. I couldn't wait to see their faces light up when I revealed the surprise. That evening, as I stood in the living room, my excitement bubbling over, Mom and Madison walked in, their expressions unreadable. Something was off, but I pushed it aside, eager to share the news. "I have a surprise for you too," I began, grinning. "I booked a trip for you, flights, hotel, everything. You're going to Newport." Mom glanced at Madison, who shifted uncomfortably. Madison spoke first, her tone cautious. "Actually, Emma, we were just about to tell you." Mom stepped forward, her voice soft but firm, the way she always was when delivering bad news. "We talked it over, and we decided Madison should go instead." My smile froze, disbelief crashing into me. "What?" "She's had such a rough year," Mom explained, reaching for Madison's hand. "With her breakup and losing that job, we just thought she needed this more." "But it's not her trip," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "I planned it for you. For both of you." "I know," Mom said, her tone as smooth as ever. "And it's so thoughtful, Emma. But Madison really deserves something like this right now. We'll go another time." Another time. I'd heard that before. It meant never. I turned to Madison, hoping for some kind of protest, a sign that she didn't agree. But she just looked down, her silence louder than any excuse she could have given. The air felt heavy, like the walls were closing in. Every ounce of excitement I'd carried for weeks now felt foolish, naive. They'd taken something I'd poured my heart into and handed it to Madison without a second thought. I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to hide the sting of their decision. "Right. Sure. Whatever you think is best." Mom gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're so understanding, Emma. I knew you'd see it our way." They moved on, talking logistics as if I wasn't even there. I watched them, feeling small, invisible, like a guest in my own family. Later that night, alone in my room, the betrayal sank deeper. This wasn't the first time. Madison always came first, her wants, her needs, her problems. And me? I was the afterthought, the one expected to understand, to step aside, to make sacrifices. I stared at the envelope on my desk, the trip that had meant so much to me now a symbol of something else entirely. This wasn't just about a vacation. This was about years of being overlooked, undervalued, unseen. Something shifted in me that night. For the first time, I realized I couldn't keep living this way. If they weren't going to prioritize me, maybe it was time I started doing it myself. The car was uncomfortably quiet except for the faint hum of the engine and the sound of Madison scrolling on her phone in the passenger seat. Mom and Dad sat in the back, chatting softly about all the places they wanted to visit in Newport, as if I weren't sitting right there in front of them. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, my knuckles white as we merged onto the freeway. It wasn't just the trip I was losing, it was the principle. I had worked overtime to save for this. I had imagined every detail, picturing their laughter and joy as they finally had a moment to relax and reconnect. But now, Madison's rough year had taken precedence over all of it. "Emma," Mom's voice broke my thoughts. "Did you print out the confirmation emails for Madison's flight and hotel? You're so much better at organizing these things than any of us." I bit back the sharp retort forming in my throat. "Yeah," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "They're in the glove compartment." Madison reached forward without a word, pulling out the neatly folded papers. She glanced over them briefly before tossing them back into the compartment like they were a throwaway receipt. "Perfect," she said, her tone casual, almost bored. "You know, Emma, you really should do this kind of stuff professionally. Travel agent or something." She said it like it was a compliment, but I heard the undercurrent, dismissive, belittling, as if all I was good for was being useful. I kept my eyes on the road, my jaw tight. Glad to know my efforts are appreciated. Madison either didn't hear the edge in my voice or didn't care. "Oh, by the way," she added, scrolling again, "I told Chelsea I'd post some pictures from the trip. She's going to be so jealous." The word jealous hit me like a slap. I'm the one who should be going. Dad leaned forward slightly, breaking into the conversation. "Make sure you get pictures of the lighthouse, Maddie. Your mom loves lighthouses." "I'll be sure to," Madison chirped, her excitement grating against my already frayed nerves. I wanted to scream. This is wrong. This isn't fair. But the words wouldn't come. Years of being the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed things over, held me back. I had been taught not to stir the pot, not to make things uncomfortable. We pulled into the airport drop-off lane, and I slid into the designated loading zone. The thud of the car doors opening and closing felt oddly final, like a punctuation mark at the end of something I couldn't yet name. Madison leaned into my window as she grabbed her bags. "Thanks for the ride, sis. You're the best." I nodded stiffly, my smile as fake as it had ever been. "Have a good trip." Mom bent down to my window, her hand resting lightly on the frame. "We'll call when we get there, sweetheart. Don't be too hard on yourself this week. Take some time for you." The hypocrisy in her words made my stomach turn, but I forced another smile. "Will do." As they walked away, chatting and laughing as if everything was perfectly fine, I sat there gripping the wheel, my nails digging into my palms. I watched them disappear into the terminal, feeling like a bystander in my own life. By the time I pulled out of the airport, tears were threatening to spill, but I blinked them back. Not here. Not now. Driving home, the silence in the car felt heavier, oppressive. The weight of their dismissal, their selfishness, bore down on me. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head, Madison's smugness, Mom's nonchalance, Dad's complete indifference to my feelings. Something inside me cracked. It wasn't a clean break, but a subtle shift, like the first signs of an earthquake. For years, I had swallowed my anger, buried my hurt, convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than being heard. Not anymore. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I knew this wasn't just about the trip. It was about years of neglect, years of being the one who gave while everyone else took. This time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I sat in the car, staring at the house, the place where I had always felt like an outsider. My hands rested on the wheel, steady now, as a new clarity began to form. This was the last time I would let them take something from me without a fight. The house was still and quiet when I returned, but inside me, a storm raged. I tossed my keys onto the counter, their clatter echoing in the empty kitchen. My eyes fell on the neatly pinned itinerary still taped to the fridge, a cruel reminder of everything I'd poured into this trip. I walked over and ripped it down, crumpling the paper in my hands. "Enough," I muttered aloud, the word like a spark to dry kindling. My laptop sat on the dining table, and I opened it with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. As the screen flickered to life, I stared at the glowing login screen, fingers hovering above the keyboard. "Do it, Emma. Reclaim this." With a sharp inhale, I dove in. First, the flights. The airline's website greeted me with cheerful colors and promises of adventure. I clicked Manage Booking and entered the confirmation number. Madison's name stared back at me, bold and unapologetic. My jaw tightened as I hit the Cancel Reservation button, a rush of satisfaction flooding me when the confirmation screen appeared. "Your refund has been initiated." "Not your trip, not anymore," I whispered, my voice trembling but resolute. Next came the hotel. The charming seaside inn, with its ocean views and personalized welcome packages I'd spent hours coordinating. I found the reservation in my emails, each detail a painful reminder of what I had planned for someone who didn't appreciate it. "Cancel," I said aloud, my finger hitting the button with finality. One by one, I dismantled the trip I had so lovingly built. The private dinner reservation? Gone. The guided lighthouse tour? Cancelled. The prepaid spa package I'd added as a surprise for Mom? Refunded. It wasn't just about taking back the money, it was about reclaiming my effort, my energy, my worth. I had worked hard for this, and they didn't deserve it. When it was all done, I leaned back in my chair, my heart racing. For the first time in years, I felt something other than resentment or sadness. I felt power. As the weight of what I'd done settled in, a small voice in my head whispered doubts. They'll be furious. Mom will guilt you. Dad will sigh and tell you you're being dramatic. Madison will play the victim. Can you handle that? I pushed the thought away. Let them be angry. Let them feel inconvenienced for once. I wasn't their doormat anymore. I shut the laptop and stood, pacing the room to burn off the adrenaline coursing through me. My reflection in the glass of the back door caught my eye. I stopped, staring at the woman looking back at me. She wasn't the same Emma who had dropped them off at the airport, swallowing her hurt and burying her anger. This Emma was done being dismissed, overlooked, and taken for granted. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the supporting character in someone else's story. I felt like the author of my own. As I gathered the crumpled itinerary and the notes I'd written during the planning process, I tossed them into the trash without hesitation. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. A declaration that I wouldn't let anyone dictate my worth again. By the time I sat back down, I already had a new plan forming. The money I had refunded would go to something that mattered to me. Let them figure out their trip on their own. For once, I wasn't going to clean up the mess. The first call came late that evening, just as I was sitting down with a cup of tea. I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. The ringtone was aggressive, as if vibrating with Mom's fury. I let it ring. When the second call came, I still didn't answer. Instead, I stared at the phone, watching it vibrate insistently on the table. Part of me wanted to turn it off, but another part of me wanted to hear what they would say. It didn't take long for the voicemail notification to pop up. Emma. Mom's voice was tight, her forced calm betraying the simmering anger beneath. We just got an email from the airline saying our tickets were canceled. Do you know anything about this? Call me back. Now. No, please. No, thank you for driving us. Just a demand. The third call came from Madison. This one I answered, mostly because I couldn't resist hearing her reaction. What the hell, Emma? She snapped as soon as I picked up. No greeting, no preamble. Why are the flights canceled? Why is the hotel saying there's no reservation under my name? Because I canceled them, I said simply, keeping my voice even. Her silence was brief but heavy, a pause loaded with disbelief. You canceled everything? Are you serious right now? Completely serious, I said. Why would you do that? She demanded, her voice climbing in pitch. You knew I was looking forward to this. I already told Chelsea about the trip. I almost laughed at her indignation. Madison, it wasn't your trip to begin with. It was supposed to be for Mom and Dad. I planned it for them, and they decided to hand it over to you like it was theirs to give. So, I took it back. Her sputtering response was almost satisfying. But, how could you? Because I'm tired, Madison, I cut in, my voice sharpening. Tired of being taken advantage of, tired of being overlooked, and tired of being the one who's always expected to step aside. If you want a trip, plan it yourself. Her gasp was audible, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. Instead, she hissed, "You're unbelievable. You've ruined everything." No, I said firmly. I'm finally standing up for myself. Big difference. She hung up, and I felt a flicker of triumph. But it didn't last long. By the time Mom called again, she wasn't even trying to hide her anger. Emma, I can't believe you would do something so childish. Canceling the trip? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for us? For you. I repeated, incredulous. How about how embarrassing it was for me to sit there and watch you hand over a trip I planned to Madison like I didn't matter? You do matter, she said quickly, her tone laced with exasperation. But Madison needed this more. No, I interrupted. She wanted it. There's a difference. And I'm done sacrificing my time, energy, and money to make everyone else happy at my own expense. That's not fair, Mom said, her voice turning sharp. You've always been the mature one, the reliable one. We count on you for things like this. And maybe that's the problem, I said. You've always counted on me without ever stopping to think about what I need. Well, not anymore. Her silence on the other end was deafening. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but the edge was still there. You're being unreasonable, Emma. You've put us in a terrible position. No, Mom, I said firmly. I've just refused to fix it for you this time. Figure it out. I hung up before she could respond, my hands trembling. It wasn't easy, standing up to her like that, but it felt necessary. The text came next, rapid fire and full of guilt-tripping. Emma, we're your family. This isn't how you treat family. We raised you better than this. You're being so selfish. I didn't respond to a single one. For once, I let them stew in the fallout of their own choices. I wasn't going to explain myself or back down. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of their reactions pressed down on me. But beneath the guilt and doubt, there was something else, a quiet, steady resolve. They could be as angry and entitled as they wanted. They could call me selfish, dramatic, unreasonable. It didn't matter. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who bent over backward to make everyone else happy. For the first time, I was standing up for myself. And I wasn't going to apologize for it. The sound of car doors slamming signaled their arrival. I stood in the kitchen, bracing myself. Part of me wanted to retreat to my room, avoid the inevitable confrontation, but the other part, the part that had spent years swallowing hurt and resentment, was ready. The front door opened, and Madison stormed in first, her suitcase dragging behind her. Her face was flushed, her expression a mix of indignation and exhaustion. Mom and Dad followed close behind, their voices low and tense as they murmured to each other. They stopped when they saw me standing there. "Oh, you're here," Madison said sharply, tossing her bag to the side. "Perfect. Let's talk about what the hell you were thinking." I folded my arms, keeping my voice calm. What I was thinking? I was thinking it was time I stopped being your doormat. Doormat? Mom echoed, her tone incredulous. "Emma, that's not fair. We've never treated you like a doormat." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Let's recap. I planned a trip for you, put time, effort, and money into making it perfect, and you decided, without even asking me, to give it to Madison. Then you expected me to just go along with it like I didn't matter." Madison rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, Emma. It wasn't that big of a deal. You're overreacting." I took a step closer, my voice steady but firm. "No, Madison. You just don't like being called out for taking something that wasn't yours to begin with." Dad stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Let's all calm down. Emma, we didn't mean to hurt you. It's just, Madison's been going through a lot, and we thought this trip could help her reset." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly despite my best efforts. "Do you ever stop to think about how I feel? What I need? Or am I just the one who's supposed to handle everything and keep quiet about it?" Mom sighed, the kind of sigh that said she thought I was being difficult. "Emma, we didn't think you'd take it this personally. You've always been so selfless, so understanding." "Exactly," I snapped, cutting her off. "I've always been the understanding one. The one who sacrifices, who steps aside, who lets Madison have the spotlight because it's easier for everyone else. But not anymore." Madison threw up her hands. "Oh, here we go. Poor Emma, always the victim. You're so dramatic." "Stop," I said, my voice sharp enough to make her pause. "This isn't drama, Madison. This is me setting boundaries. You don't get to take from me anymore. None of you do." The room went silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. Dad ran a hand through his hair, looking more uncomfortable than angry. "Emma, we're family. We're supposed to support each other." "Funny," I said, a bitter laugh escaping. "Because that's all I've ever done. Supported you. Made things easier for you. But when it's my turn, when I need something, I'm supposed to just accept being pushed aside." Mom stepped forward, her voice soft but insistent. "We love you, Emma. You know that. But this feels vindictive. Canceling everything? That wasn't fair to Madison." I met her gaze, my own eyes hard. "You're right. It wasn't fair. But neither was what you did to me. And maybe it's time you all learned that there are consequences for treating me like an afterthought." Madison scoffed. "Oh, so this is about revenge?" "No," I said firmly. "This is about respect. And if I have to cancel a trip or stand up to you to get it, then so be it. For the first time, Dad looked genuinely uneasy. So, what happens now? What happens now, I said, my voice steady, is that I stop letting you walk all over me. I won't fund your vacations, fix your problems, or clean up your messes anymore. If you want something, you'll have to figure it out yourselves. And if that makes me selfish, then so be it. Mom opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. No, I'm done explaining myself, I said, my voice quiet but resolute. You don't have to like my decisions, but you will respect them. The silence that followed was deafening, but for the first time, it didn't scare me. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them to sit with their own discomfort. For once, I didn't feel the need to stay and make it better. I didn't feel the need to be the fixer. I had said my piece, and for the first time, that was enough. The house felt quieter now, not from the absence of sound, but from the absence of tension. The air was lighter, easier to breathe. I hadn't realized how much I'd been carrying until I finally set it down. The morning after the confrontation, I woke up later than usual, sunlight streaming through the blinds. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the gnawing need to get up and fix something, to plan, to smooth over, to anticipate someone else's needs. I made myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching the world go about its business. My mind, usually buzzing with to-do lists and worry, was unusually quiet. It wasn't a void, though. It was space for me to exist without the weight of expectation. The first thing I did was take a walk. Not to clear my head or escape, but because I wanted to. I put on my favorite sneakers, grabbed a book I'd been meaning to read, and headed to the park. I found a sunny spot on a bench and opened the book, letting the words draw me into a world that had nothing to do with family drama or responsibilities. For once, I wasn't interrupted by a phone call or a text demanding my attention. I wasn't expecting tears, but they came anyway. Quiet and unforced, they trickled down my cheeks as I sat there, the realization washing over me. I was free. Free to choose myself, to live on my own terms. By the time I returned home, the heaviness that had lingered for years was already starting to lift. The following days became an exercise in rediscovery. I dug out my art supplies from the back of the closet, paintbrushes, tubes of acrylic, a battered sketchbook. I hadn't touched them in years, always too busy, too consumed with taking care of everyone else. The first strokes were clumsy, my hand unfamiliar with the movements. But soon, the colors began to flow, spreading across the canvas like a bomb. It didn't matter that the lines weren't perfect. It didn't matter that no one else would see it. It was mine. I took myself out for lunch at a cozy little cafe I'd always meant to try, but never had the time for. Sitting there with a steaming cup of chai and a plate of freshly baked croissants, I felt an unexpected surge of pride. This was what life could look like, simple, joyful, unburdened. I even splurged on a weekend yoga retreat, something I'd once dismissed as indulgent. But as I stretched and breathed alongside strangers who didn't know my history, I felt my body letting go of years of tension. The texts from Mom, Dad, and Madison kept coming, though they were fewer and farther between. Some were apologetic, others defensive, but I didn't feel the need to respond. For the first time, I realized I didn't owe them anything, not explanations, not justifications, not my time. That realization extended beyond them. At work, I started saying no to extra tasks that weren't my responsibility. When friends reached out for favors, I paused to consider whether I truly wanted to help or was simply defaulting to my old patterns. Each boundary I set felt like a small victory, a brick added to the foundation of my newfound autonomy. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, I allowed myself to reflect on everything that had happened. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet understanding of the choices I had made and why they mattered. For so long, I had defined myself by what I could do for others, by how well I could meet their expectations. But now, I was learning to define myself by something simpler and more profound, who I wanted to be. The thought made me smile. In the distance, the phone rang inside the house, but I didn't rush to answer it. Instead, I stayed where I was, enjoying the cool breeze and the feeling of being exactly where I needed to be, in my own company. For the first time in years, I felt whole. The idea came to me as I scrolled through photos of the seaside and I had originally booked for my parents. A travel ad popped up, a picturesque view of the Amalfi Coast, its pastel-colored buildings stacked against a cliffside, the turquoise waters sparkling below. Italy. I'd always dreamed of going but had never let myself entertain the thought seriously. There was always something else, someone else, that took priority. Not this time. I opened my laptop, fingers trembling with excitement, and searched for flights. It felt impulsive, reckless even, but I didn't care. Within an hour, I had booked everything: a flight to Naples, a cozy bed and breakfast near the coast, and a week of exploring art, food, and culture. For the first time, I wasn't planning a trip for anyone else. This one was for me. The plane touched down on a warm spring morning, and as I stepped out of the airport, I felt a thrill of nervousness. This was my first solo trip, my first time truly stepping out of my comfort zone. The drive to the Amalfi Coast was like something out of a dream. The winding roads hugged the cliffs, offering breathtaking views of the Mediterranean. When I arrived at the bed and breakfast, a charming villa draped in blooming bougainvillea, I couldn't stop smiling. "Welcome to Amalfi," the host said, handing me a set of keys. "You'll find everything you need here. Make yourself at home." Home. The word carried a weight I hadn't realized I was shedding until now. The first day, I wandered aimlessly through the narrow streets of Amalfi, stopping to admire the brightly painted ceramic shops and savor the scent of fresh lemons that seemed to linger everywhere. I treated myself to gelato, eating it slowly as I watched the waves lap against the shore. The next morning, I took a boat tour to Capri. The island's beauty was staggering. Its rugged cliffs and sparkling grottos felt almost unreal. As the boat rocked gently on the water, I let myself lean into the moment, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. One evening, I joined a cooking class in a local farmhouse. I rolled pasta by hand, laughed with strangers over shared mistakes, and savored the simplest yet most exquisite meal I'd ever eaten. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't thinking about anyone else, what they needed, what they wanted, or how I could fix things for them. I was fully present, soaking in the joy of simply being. On my last night, I hiked up to Ravello, a town perched high above the coast. I found a quiet spot overlooking the sea, the sun dipping low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I sat there for what felt like hours, the cool breeze brushing against my skin as I watched the waves shimmer in the fading light. It struck me then how far I'd come, not just in miles, but in my understanding of myself. For years, I had lived for others, shaped my life around their needs and expectations. But here, in this moment, I felt whole, independent, free. The trip wasn't just a vacation, it was a reclamation of joy, of purpose, of the parts of me I had ignored for too long. Before leaving, I stopped at a small ceramic shop and purchased a hand-painted tile. It depicted a winding coastal road with the words Strada Nuova, New Road, etched at the top. Back at home, I would hang it as a reminder of this journey, of the choice to live my life for myself. As the plane soared above the clouds on the way back, I felt no sadness, only anticipation. The life waiting for me wasn't one of obligations and sacrifices. It was mine. The email came a week after I returned from Italy, buried between a promotional offer from my gym and a recipe newsletter. The subject line was uncharacteristically simple: "We need to talk." It was from Mom. For a moment, I hovered over it, debating whether to open it at all. But curiosity, and perhaps a sliver of hope, won out. "Emma, I know things have been tense between us lately, and I want to start by saying I'm sorry. I realize we haven't always been fair to you, and I hate that it's taken this long for me to acknowledge it. Our trip didn't go the way we thought it would. Madison wasn't ready for it, and truthfully, I think we all missed you. You've always been the one who keeps everything together, and I suppose we took that for granted. I don't want to lose you, Emma. I hope we can talk soon." I read the message twice, my emotions a mix of surprise and skepticism. It wasn't the outpouring of regret I might have wished for, but it was something, a crack in the wall they'd built between us. A few days later, Mom called. This time, I answered. "Hi, Emma," she began, her voice tentative. "Thank you for taking my call." I stayed quiet, letting her talk. "Listen, I know I've made mistakes. We've made mistakes. And I hate how things turned out. I didn't realize how much we were leaning on you until you weren't there to catch us." Her words were careful, deliberate, and I could hear the genuine regret in her tone. "I know an apology isn't enough, but I want to start somewhere." I took a breath, steadying myself. "Mom, I appreciate you saying that. But this isn't just about one trip. It's about years of being overlooked and expected to be okay with it. I'm not angry anymore, but I need you to understand that things have to change if we're going to move forward." "I know," she said quietly. "And I want to do better." Madison's voice suddenly chimed in the background, clearly not expecting to be overheard. "I still don't see what the big deal is." "Madison," Mom snapped, her frustration evident. "I told you I'd handle this." I sighed. "And that's exactly what I mean, Mom. Words are easy, but if nothing changes, if Madison and everyone else keep acting like I'm overreacting, then this conversation doesn't mean anything." There was a long pause. When Mom finally spoke again, her voice was softer. "You're right. I can't force anyone else to see it, but I can promise you that I'll try. I'll make an effort to show you that you matter, Emma. I mean it. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a resolution. But it was a start." After we hung up, Madison texted me a curt apology. It was short and insincere, likely prompted by Mom. I didn't respond. Instead, I wrote back to Mom, clarifying my boundaries. "I'm glad we talked, but I need to see real changes. This means no more assuming I'll handle things without asking, no more dismissing my feelings, and no more treating me like the fixer. I'm willing to rebuild our relationship, but only if it's based on mutual respect." Her reply was brief but hopeful. "Understood. One step at a time." In the weeks that followed, Mom made an effort. She called just to ask how I was doing, not to ask for favors or updates on the family. She even sent a photo of her and Dad cooking dinner together, captioned, "Trying to manage without our fixer." It made me laugh, despite myself. Madison, however, stayed distant, her responses clipped and guarded. I let it be. I wasn't going to force her to understand. The small cracks in their behavior weren't monumental, but they were enough to give me hope. Reconciliation, I realized, wouldn't be a grand gesture. It would be a series of small, deliberate steps, each one requiring effort and trust. For now, I wasn't rushing to bridge the gap. I had my own life to focus on, my own happiness to prioritize. If they were willing to meet me halfway, I'd be there. But I wouldn't settle for anything less. As I hung the ceramic tile from Italy on my wall, a reminder of my journey, I felt a quiet sense of peace. I wasn't looking to fix my family anymore. I was looking to heal myself, and if they wanted to join me on that path, they'd have to prove it one step at a time. The days stretched into weeks, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't tethered to anyone else's expectations. It was like stepping into sunlight after years in the shadows. I started small, rediscovering the things that had once brought me joy. My mornings now began with a run through the park, the rhythmic sound of my feet on the pavement clearing my mind. I signed up for a pottery class at the local community center, something I'd always been curious about but never made time for. The first time I sat at the pottery wheel, my hands clumsy as the clay spun beneath them, I felt like a beginner in the best possible way, eager, open to the possibility of learning something new. What began as curiosity quickly turned into a passion. The satisfaction of molding something with my hands, of watching it take shape, was unlike anything I'd felt in years. I loved the process, the messiness, the mistakes, the moments of unexpected beauty. By the end of the class, I had a small collection of lopsided bowls and uneven mugs, each one a tangible reminder of the joy I was rediscovering. Encouraged by that success, I joined a local hiking group. It was a mix of strangers at first, teachers, retirees, college students, but over time, they became friends. Together, we explored nearby trails, scaling hills that offered breathtaking views of the city below. Standing at the top of those peaks, the wind in my hair and the world stretching out before me, I felt invincible. One of the group leaders, an adventurous woman named Clara, invited me to a book club she hosted once a month. At first, I hesitated. Joining another group felt like too much, but Clara's enthusiasm was contagious. The book club turned out to be a vibrant, welcoming space where I met people who shared my love for stories. We'd spend hours debating characters, dissecting plots, and sharing bits of our own lives between pages. For the first time in years, I felt part of a community that valued me for who I was, not what I could do for them. Italy had awakened something in me, a hunger for more. One afternoon, while scrolling through photos from my trip, I decided to start planning my next adventure. This time, it would be a road trip through the Pacific Northwest. I mapped out routes, bookmarked hidden gems along the way, and reserved a cabin in the woods for a few days of solitude. The planning process was exhilarating. Every detail felt like a declaration. I was living my life for myself on my own terms. At work, I found a newfound confidence in setting boundaries. I stopped volunteering for extra tasks that weren't mine to handle, focusing instead on projects that excited me. I even applied for a leadership development program, a role I might have shied away from before. When I was accepted, I celebrated with a dinner out, just me and a bottle of wine, toasting to the person I was becoming. My family still lingered on the periphery of my life. Mom called occasionally, her tone softer, her words more careful. Madison remained distant, her texts infrequent and neutral. But for the first time, their approval, or lack of it, didn't define me. I was building something stronger than validation from others. I was building myself. One evening, as I sat in my living room shaping clay into what might one day resemble a vase, I paused to take it all in. The shelves were lined with books from the club, their spines worn from being passed around. A pair of hiking boots sat by the door, still dusty from the weekend's trek. A calendar on the wall was filled with dates for pottery classes, group hikes, and my upcoming road trip. This was my life now. Full. Vibrant. My own. I smiled, letting the clay spin beneath my fingers. There was still so much I wanted to do, so many places to explore, skills to learn, and experiences to savor. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to give me permission to chase those dreams. I had given it to myself. Months had passed since the confrontation, since the solo trip to Italy, since I started choosing myself. Sitting on the porch one crisp autumn evening, wrapped in a soft blanket with a cup of tea warming my hands, I realized how far I had come. Life wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, still challenges to face, but it was mine. And that made all the difference. The old me would have been consumed by guilt after standing up to my family. I would have replayed every argument, every sharp word, wondering if I had gone too far. But this version of me knew better. I had learned that it wasn't selfish to set boundaries. It wasn't cruel to demand respect. And it wasn't my job to sacrifice my happiness to keep the peace. For years, I had allowed myself to shrink, to fit the role my family expected of me, the fixer, the supporter, the one who made things easier for everyone else. But in doing so, I had ignored my own needs, my own dreams. Not anymore. Mom had made an effort to change. Her calls were less frequent, but more meaningful, her words less loaded with expectation. Dad had started sending little notes, an article he thought I'd like, a recipe he'd tried, as if trying to connect in his own quiet way. Madison remained a distant presence, her pride still a barrier between us. I didn't push her to bridge the gap. If she wanted a relationship, she would have to meet me halfway. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for apologies or validation. I had let go of the hope that they would ever fully understand my perspective, and in doing so, I had found peace. My life was full in ways I hadn't imagined before. The pottery studio had become my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the rhythm of creating. My hiking group had turned into a family of sorts, their camaraderie a reminder that relationships built on mutual respect and shared joy were the ones worth nurturing. And the Pacific Northwest road trip? It had been everything I'd hoped for: serene forests, stunning coastlines, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had planned it all for myself. I even started dreaming bigger, a trek through Patagonia, a photography course in Kyoto, writing a memoir about this journey of reclaiming my life. One evening, I pulled the ceramic tile I had bought in Italy from the shelf. Strada Nuova, New Road. It was more than just a souvenir now. It was a symbol of everything I had chosen, a new path, a new way of living, a new way of being. I hung it on the wall by my front door, a reminder to honor the journey I had taken and to keep moving forward. The transformation wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't about cutting ties or making grand declarations. It was about quiet, deliberate choices, choosing to love myself, to respect myself, to believe that I was worth the life I wanted. I had become someone who didn't wait for others to validate her, someone who didn't bend to meet their expectations. I was living for myself now, and I was finally happy. As I sipped my tea and watched the sun dip below the horizon, I smiled. I wasn't just Emma anymore, the fixer, the peacemaker, the afterthought. I was Emma, whole and free. And that was enough.